People and governments around the world have been turning towards electrification and other means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Hydrogen fuel has been proposed as one solution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. However, in the past, there have been a number of barriers relating to the adoption of hydrogen fuel. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Robbie toku ingoa. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about two critical advances in ammonia technology that could revolutionise the way we think about hydrogen fuel and accelerate our transition to a low-carbon Aotearoa New Zealand. We all know of the harmful effects climate change is having on the planet. We're seeing events such as ocean acidification, sea level rise, loss of biodiversity, and many more effects. Unfortunately, the International Energy Agency have shown that even if all the governments achieve their climate pledges, we're still not going to hit that 1.5 degrees Celsius target. There is clearly more work that needs to be done in this space. When we look at our emissions profile in New Zealand, we can see that transport makes up a significant component of our emissions profile. It accounts for almost 20% of our emissions alone, and is clearly a space that needs work done in to reduce emissions. Now, if we break down transport emissions, we can see that there are emissions from light vehicles and heavy vehicles. Over time, in the bottom graph, we can see that emissions from light vehicles are going to be going down, and this is due to electrification, which lends itself nicely to light vehicles. Unfortunately, there is a key issue here, and that is heavy vehicle emissions, which are actually going to be going up over time, because electrification doesn't work as well with heavy vehicles, air transport and industrial processes. That will result, if no changes are made right now, to heavy vehicles making up the bulk of transport emissions in Aotearoa New Zealand by 2050. This is clearly a space that needs work, and the New Zealand government has recognised that and stated that we need alternative fuel sources to work alongside electrification to reduce emissions across the board. This is where hydrogen fuel comes in, and hydrogen fuel cells. The idea is hydrogen goes in at the anode of the fuel cell. Electrons are then stripped from those hydrogen atoms, and they travel around a circuit to generate electricity. Those protons with a positive charge then travel through the membrane, recombine with those electrons and oxygen to form heat and water. A much more circular process, one that requires less energy and is better for the environment. However, there are a range of issues with hydrogen as a fuel source in its current state. Right now, there is a lack of suitable storage and transportation options, and there are several safety risks associated with transporting and using pure hydrogen as a fuel source. It's also costly and inefficient to produce and transport hydrogen due to those reasons outlined above. Could ammonia be the solution? Well, some people think so. The idea is that ammonia is used as a vessel to transport hydrogen instead of transporting pure hydrogen itself. Ammonia has several advantages, including that it can transport more hydrogen per unit volume than pure hydrogen itself. This means the process of transporting hydrogen becomes more efficient, and ammonia has less safety risks and requirements in terms of the actual storage and transportation of it. Whereas pure hydrogen, you need high pressure environments to transport that, and there are those extensive safety risks in terms of the flammability and explosiveness of pure hydrogen. Seems great, right? Unfortunately, right now, it's not. There are a suite of issues with ammonia in its current state. Right now, to produce ammonia, it's highly inefficient and energy intensive. Producing ammonia for fertilizer use, and that's fertilizer use alone, accounts for 2% of our global greenhouse gas emissions, which is significant. If we were going to use ammonia as a fuel source, or as a transportation for hydrogen fuel, we'd be looking at a substantial increase in greenhouse gas emissions given the current state of technology. It also requires significant and unrealistic investment to produce that ammonia, because you often need huge plants and very high temperatures and pressures to achieve ammonia production. Furthermore, ammonia right now isn't compatible with our modern hydrogen fuel cells. This is because when you decompose that ammonia into hydrogen to use in those hydrogen fuel cells, you end up with a little bit of residual ammonia, and even 1 part per million residual ammonia will absolutely destroy the hydrogen fuel cell. So there are 2 fundamental issues with ammonia. The production of ammonia, right now it's inefficient, energy intensive and costly, and the conversion of ammonia to hydrogen in a way that is compatible with our current hydrogen fuel cells. This is where we come in. We propose a 2-stage approach and a 2-stage change to the way we think about ammonia. This is on both the production side of things and then decomposing ammonia into hydrogen, addressing both of the fundamental issues I've just outlined. If we start with the production of ammonia, right now we use the Haber-Bosch process to produce ammonia. It's been developed significantly over the past 100 years and it's as efficient as it's going to get. However, that is still extremely inefficient and energy intensive. You need temperatures upwards of 400 degrees Celsius and pressures 200 times atmospheric pressure. And the reason for this is you're trying to combine elemental hydrogen with elemental nitrogen, which are both very stable species in their own right. When you try and combine those and react them together, it takes a lot of energy to get the molecules to do that. Clearly there is work that needs to be done in this space, and this is where plasma-induced electrocatalytic reduction of nitrogen comes in. The idea is you take nitrogen from the air, you activate it with a non-thermal plasma, and this turns the nitrogen into more reactive NOx species. Those NOx species are then in a solution of water, they move into an electrochemical cell, and are then electrochemically reduced to form ammonia. This process is not only more efficient, it requires significantly less energy and produces it with less emissions. The old process of doing things also seems rather counterintuitive. We have to first produce the hydrogen through steam reforming of natural gases, and then we have to convert that hydrogen that we've just made into ammonia, and then we have to reconvert that back into hydrogen, which creates a load of energy inefficiencies and energy losses. Our process simply takes nitrogen from the air, activates it, and then converts it to ammonia. Now if we turn to the decomposition side of things, in the past, ammonia has been decomposed predominantly using thermal decomposition. However, as I've alluded to, there are issues around contamination with thermal decomposition. Thermal decomposition inevitably leads to some residual ammonia, which then contaminates fuel cells and renders them useless. Electrochemical decomposition could be an alternative. However, several studies have shown that electrochemical decomposition is inefficient and not economical. What we propose is a combination of the two. This is thermal and electrochemical decomposition of ammonia in tandem. So here's the technology above, and you can see that we start with the thermal decomposition of ammonia, and we crack that into N2 and H2. That's usually where we stop with thermal decomposition, and we're then left with residual NH3, which would contaminate those hydrogen fuel cells. But we're saying, let's take that some steps further and electrochemically isolate that hydrogen through those series of steps, and then we get pure hydrogen at the end that can be readily used in the hydrogen fuel cell with no contamination whatsoever. This process has also been shown to be more efficient than either thermal decomposition or electrochemical decomposition alone. When we combine these approaches, we now have a more efficient, less energy intensive and lower cost way of producing ammonia, and we also have a much more efficient and safer way of decomposing the ammonia in a way that is compatible with our hydrogen fuel cells. Combined, these approaches could accelerate and spur the adoption of hydrogen fuel and help us transition to a low carbon economy. Now, there are a range of benefits for Aotearoa New Zealand. As I've stated, it could accelerate our transition to a low carbon Aotearoa New Zealand. Moreover, it will create jobs in an industry that is growing, novel, and would create international competitiveness for New Zealand and New Zealand workers. Moreover, it would help us achieve our emissions reduction goals, and investing now would help us lower the cost of further emissions reductions in the future. We know climate change isn't going away anytime soon, so whatever we can do today to lower the cost of emissions reductions in the future is going to be beneficial for our efforts against climate change. And finally, and importantly, the process I've described is very circular and aligns with principles in Mātauranga Māori and Te Ao Māori. We can see that we essentially start with air and we finish with air, and in that process we've created energy and turned our transport sector into a low carbon sector. There is a real opportunity for tangata whenua to drive this industry forward, and we're already seeing activity in this space. One example is the Tuaro Paki Trust, who have partnered with a Japanese corporation to use geothermal energy to produce hydrogen. This is an exciting space to work in, and one that Māori and tangata whenua can contribute to significantly. Overall, hydrogen fuel could be closer than we've ever imagined, and adopting these two technologies could be what we need to spur the adoption and accelerate our transition to a low carbon economy. Thank you.